Are we on?
Hello, and we're live. That was a very smooth
It was,
transition.
yeah, it's very radio voice. Hello, my name's Aaron Bjorklund. No, I am sitting in Aaron Bjorklund's chair today. Like, I usually sit the other side, and I'm deeply uncomfortable. I am disgusted, the subject for the next week, about this chair. Or about this arrangement. I feel like my better side is the other side.
And you may not fully know this because this fixture is similar to the background, except for it's not been organized.
And there's no door.
In any way, shape, or form. But I'm in a new space.
Yeah, we have a new staff person
and
starting.
If you're paying attention closely, you can see it's a complete mess. Like, I wish I could flip the camera around for you right now and see that we've got our microphones are attached to this bouncy chair right now.
We're just surviving.
And if we bump it too much, it might fall over.
Yeah. It's putting us in fight or flight response.
I see what you did
because
there.
we're talking this week about fear. So I had a starting question for us, jumping into that on a sort of lighter way. Do you like being scared? I mean,
no,
you don't. You're not like.
I'm
so
not
you're
a horror movie. I'm not a horror
guy.
movie guy. One time, Allison and I were looking for like cool date ideas. It's shocking how many on all of the lists of cool date ideas. It's like watch a horror movie and snuggle up with your loved one, and I'm like, no. Yeah. But all of the lists have that.
Do you
like it?
Well, I like it more than my wife likes it. Yeah. So she hates anything that's horror. Laura hates anything that's horror. Hates anything that's like thriller. She won't watch Jaws. And since she watched a movie about sharks as a kid, I always joke, every time she gets into the ocean, and we go to the ocean every year with my family back in England, and sharks hate the cold water around England. Let me just say this, there's like one sighting of a dangerous shark ever in those waters, and she puts her foot in the water, and every time she does it, she's like, every shark in 100 miles is like, ooh, that smells good. They're like flying, swimming fast in that direction. So she likes it less than I do. I can handle it, but I was always intrigued. When I was in Michigan, a load of my friends, there's a couple of really famous haunted houses in Michigan. And it's like those ones where you have to sign disclaimers or you have to sign like releases of liability, and people grab at you and pull you into rooms. I mean, it's really intense. Wow. And I was always just intrigued that people wanted to do that. I was like, why do you want to do that? And again, like, it's something about the adrenaline rush. Do you like roller coasters?
I've enjoyed a roller coaster in my day. It's not like I...
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is I've watched you snowboard. And you, again, like, different perspectives for different people on snowboarding. And Aaron and I went snowboarding, and he hadn't been for like 12 years. So when we got there... And you had this moment where you're like, why is everybody wearing helmets? And I was like, welcome to like the last 10 years. Everybody wears a helmet. And the last time you'd been...
I hope my wife isn't watching this again. Like every single week you say something, you're like, Aaron didn't wear a helmet?
I didn't know that you hadn't discussed that.
I'm just joking.
It was not like you're on a motorbike, but you were one of the few people on a mountain without a helmet. And you are bigger than me. You're like 6'4" or whatever, so you get some speed up, man. I'm like watching you, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah, heavy things fall fast.
Yeah, and so there are obviously. I was listening to, and we talked a little bit about this climber, Alex Hanold, this week, who climbs these crazy things, and he said like he loves skiing, and he said what I love is just skiing really fast down really steep stuff. There's some adrenaline that kicks in. So obviously fight and flight, this process we go into where our brain reacts, it gives that adrenaline rush. And some people, it seems, love creating that just in everyday life.
Yeah, I keep having to come up here because my microphone's just too far away, and I'm not sure. I'm like afraid if I pull it all the way out.
I think you're going to be fine. Look at that.
Oh gosh, I wish you guys could see how precarious this whole entire setup is.
It's going to be a viral moment if it all collapses on top of us. We're like lying there, just live, just
Yeah, there's trash everywhere. Anyway, welcome to my office, but I've got to get my head off of that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. We're fine.
Get to fear.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like that feeling of addiction. It's like an addiction to adrenaline.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a category of people that are like that.
3 of my uncles were involved in motorcycling. So one of them was a designer. He designed the first suspension forks. If you ride a motorbike and you don't...
It's ended.
Oh, wow. Well, that was fun.
Are we not live?
I know. We were live for a while.
Are we live? Did I do something wrong? Maybe we are live. Maybe we aren't.
We don't even know anymore. I'm just going to keep talking. You never let dead air,
No,
go.
The show must go on.
Just keep talking and fill the
Pretending
space.
like we know what we're doing.
I'm just going to start quoting opening lines from books just to keep us.
No, we're live. That's weird. It was like...
I saw fear in your eyes.
Fear.
I saw fight and flight response. You were like, what am I going to do?
I just start fighting you. Fighting you. The only thing I could see close by to fight. That's a double distortion when your fight or flight response is not functioning properly, which is something that causes a lot of unhealth.
It does, yeah.
And then if you also can't decide which one to do, to fight or to flight.
Yeah, yeah.
Just randomly fight you.
You would,
just because I got scared.
You would win. You're much bigger than me. Although I might be faster. Who knows? I could run.
I am super slow.
I was going to use that classic joke on Sunday, and I completely missed it. It was somewhere in my notes that I'd put together beforehand. Or notes is maybe too strong. My thoughts that I put together beforehand. But there's the story about the 2 guys walking in the woods, and they see a bear coming. And the one guy starts to take off his shoes. And the guy's like, why are you taking off your shoes? And he's like, I run faster without my shoes on. And the second guy's like, yeah, but you're still not going to outrun a bear. They're super fast. And the guy's like, oh, no, I don't care about the bear. I only have to outrun you. I outrun you. The bear gets you. He's occupied for a while. I'm fine. So maybe I'm faster. I don't know.
Probably.
Anyway, I was talking about my uncles. And I think there's a fear... sense or addiction maybe somewhere in my family. My one uncle used to design motorbikes. So again, if you have suspension forks on your motorbike, you have him to thank for that. He invented those, which is pretty cool.
Seriously?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, for aerial motors back in the 40s, 1940s. And then my other uncle was an engineer, and they both lived long and healthy lives. You would go over to their house; they were still bachelors, and they'd be just in the living room, no TV, just a radio. And you go, there'd be a coffee table, or there'd just be an engine block just sat on the table, oil coming off it, just tinkering away, listening to the radio. And then the other uncle, the younger brother, was a racer. And he actually got killed in a Grand Prix. He was one of those, years ago now. So crashed into a tree and just gone. But that,
wow.
Motorbike culture is somewhere in the family. So I would in some ways love to ride motorbikes. But interestingly, my wife was like, no motorbikes. So there is her fear for me, which is a different type of fear, right? I mean,
is.
There's the fear of what can happen to me in a moment. Maybe this is where we talk about that fear and anxiety thing, which is maybe some of the feelings some of you guys out there have is fear in that moment, fight or flight. That's one type of fear. The preparation, the imagination of fear in the future is a very different thing.
Now, would you say that's anxiety?
That's what I'm that's what I'm sort of wondering really as we sort of turn that corner. Isn't that what we're talking about? That constant feeling that something might happen. Last night, my daughter couldn't sleep. She's 10. And she was like, I can't get to sleep. Will you come lie in my room with me? And I went and lay in there for a little bit, hard floor, freezing cold. And she's like, no, I still can't sleep. And my only solution in that moment was well, do you want to go downstairs and watch a show? Thinking she'd say no because she wouldn't want to be downstairs by herself. But she actually said yes. And I went back to bed and then lay there in bed with some kind of anxiety about her being downstairs by herself in the middle of the night. Even though the house is locked, consciously I'm it's perfectly safe. But it was a new experience. I hadn't been in that space before. And again, if you've got teenagers out there or have older kids, you've been there. You've been to the point. I used to stay up watching movies till 3 o'clock in the morning when I was 14, 15. But again, at 10, this was a new thing, and it put me in that space of imagining all of these things that could happen.
Yeah.
Even though I'm only 20 stairs up or something like that. Like it just, it's different when you're thinking about somebody else.
Yeah. So, one of the things that you talked about on Sunday that I think is important to like bring up again as a reminder and stuff is you talked about fear being sort of a core thing. So expound upon that again. Like, I don't exactly remember the exact words you used, but it's sort of underneath a lot of other emotions.
So it was a psychologist's point of view, which seems to have some basis of the two core emotions of fear and love. And interestingly, she would say, and interestingly, you might argue that the writers of scripture would say, you can't be in fear and love at the same time. So yes, an emotion, like a broader emotion either comes out of love or it comes out of fear. Like sadness, she would say, is just the next step from fear. Fear of death, fear of loss, fear of abandonment. There's something behind sadness that isn't just sadness. It's like, it's questions about what's going to happen.
It's sadness might be like a fear of the new normal.
Yeah. Almost always when you think about something you're sad about, you can place a fear next to it. And that might be the thing that made you sad. So if I think like, what was the last thing I was sad about? Maybe I'm sad about, maybe like in the past, like if I lost a job or something, I might be sad that I lost my job. But really, why am I sad? Like suddenly I don't have to go to work anymore. That's actually quite nice. Suddenly I've got no responsibilities. I'm just going to sit around doing nothing. In actual fact, like I'm actually fearful that I won't have enough financial resources to live. Or maybe I really loved the job and I lost the job and I'm now sad. Well, why am I sad? Well, I fear that I'm not going to be able to get a job that's as good as that one. I fear that I'll have to take a job I don't like. I'm fearful like my identity is challenged, all those different things. People will think less of me. Again, sadness is definitely there, but somewhere working underneath it, no, it's fear or anxiety that says.
Yeah, and I know for me, one of the emotions that sort of manifests itself in my life most obviously is maybe anger. But it took me years of my life to start to realize that it's actually fear. And my way of dealing with fear, again, this fight or flight thing is fight.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like either shout or grit my teeth or, pound my fist or whatever it may be. It's sort of like my way of trying to retake control over of a moment.
Well, you see that
I'm afraid of.
You see that like like most of you that are parents or have been parents, there's that moment where your child runs out into the road and you go and grab them out of the road. And then what do you do? Very naturally, you just light them up. You're just like, what are you doing? I'm so angry. And maybe you yell, maybe depending on the generation, it's like a physical punishment. But again, it's not anger. It's definitely fear. It's you have been put in this moment of imagining, what if the worst could have happened?
Totally.
And depending on your personality, maybe it manifests not as sadness rather than anger. One time when we were in New York, we were at some friend's house and the house was on the top of a hill. The driveway went down to this main road. And Gigi and Elena were with the kids that lived in the house. They were riding around the building over and over again. And they were told, don't go down the driveway. But one of the kids that lived in the house said to Gigi, no, we should ride down the driveway. And she'd done it multiple times when she shouldn't have. She was fine. Gigi lost control of the bike, and I just heard this scream and then this crash. And I ran around the corner, and she was lying next to the road, like a foot from the road. And a car was like pulled up, like right by her. And she just managed to like fall off the bike right before she hit the road. This was a main road. People flew along this thing at like 60 miles an hour. And so for me, my reaction was just the sadness of imagining what life without her would have looked like. That's where my thoughts went.
And what's crazy about that response is you probably didn't consciously imagine her entire life.
No. But
there's like this instantaneous, the fight or flight response is this massive surge of into your body to prepare you for the worst. And then, so you feel this emotion of sadness, which is like, she's important to me. I want to protect. It then converts to fight or flight, protectiveness and anger and whatever it may be. It's like that happens like that.
And it's
so crazy.
And that's why I think fear and anxiety is such an interesting pair for us to talk about. Because I think we could do some work around fear. We could say, I recognize in my life, this is where the fight or flight response of fear gets me. And you said it manifests as anger. And you maybe get to say, no, I'm going to try and be more conscious and ready for those moments and not respond in anger. That's healthy growth. But I think most of us were not in that place as much as we are in the place of anxiety, which is again, the language that really, really was helpful for me was, or a couple of pieces actually. One was fight or flight. Fear is what happens when a bear jumps out at you as you walk through the woods. It's a thing that you have to react. Anxiety is starting the walk and spending the whole time expecting a bear to jump out of the woods. Just sitting in that place of consciously where's the bear? Where's the bear? Where's the bear? Where's the bear? That's a better picture of anxiety.
Yeah. I had that moment yesterday, actually. So I took a 2-day silent retreat at this amazing little retreat center. It was one night. And I was just trying to refresh and replenish and all that sort of thing.
And I gave you a hard time initially because I thought you were just going because you were preaching this week, which you are, which is super exciting. But I was like, dude, if I went away for 2 days every time I preached, I'd never be here.
That's right.
On the other hand, if I was up to worship this week, I'd be in a car driving somewhere else. I'd just be getting out of here. So
I do admit. So I tried to spend the majority of the first day just connecting with God and not working on my sermon or anything like that. But then it wasn't quite the same retreat, knowing that I had a sermon looming over my head.
Looming is such a great word for a sermon. It looms.
It's looming.
And now it's going to loom over all of your heads on Sunday.
That's right. Anyway, so yesterday morning, I got up before sunrise, and I was going to take a walk before sunrise. And you guys, if you're from Colorado, it was pretty cold and really, really windy. All I had was a hoodie, and I have a pretty high internal core temperature, so I was fine. I was I threw on my long sleeve shirt and my hoodie, and I went for this walk. And you walk out, it's in Sedalia, and you just walk out into these rolling hills, and you can walk for... It's about a 2-mile loop, and I decided to do the full 2-mile loop before breakfast. And it was cold enough that my ears were starting to get cold, so I actually flipped up my hoodie, and I sort of tied it down, so it was just like this much, because it kept blowing off and all this stuff. Anyway, and then halfway through the walk, I realized it's really windy, and I can't hear much. And I hadn't seen a deer in a while, and there's normally hundreds of deer all over the place on this grounds. And then I had this moment where I realized the last time I'd visited this place, I'd been walking and I'd found a deer carcass way back in one of the hidden paths, just off the path. And I was like, I bet that there's mountain lions up here. And so I was like, okay, that's fine. I haven't seen a deer. But then the rest of that walk, I'm kind of I'm in this thing, so I can't see super well. I can't hear because it's windy, and I'm kind of I'm not in a great position here.
No.
To notice if I'm being attacked by a mountain lion. And then I started thinking about that guy who a couple years ago in Colorado was running and got attacked by a mountain lion and killed this mountain lion with his bare hands.
What?
And I was like,
that's gonna be me.
I'm could I do that? And so I'm amped up, and I'm trying to spend time with Jesus. Meanwhile, I'm getting myself amped up to try and attack a mountain lion.
Jesus loves mountain lions too. Would not kill it.
I was like, I would just gently, put it to sleep by choking it or something. Like that's how strong I think I am.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Just choke it to sleep. We should have a whole session on would Jesus be a hunter if he lived today?
Oh man.
Does Jesus doesn't matter, man.
There might be some debates in the comments below about that particular one.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Hey?
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think it's anxiety where we land more often. That conscious feeling that something's going to go wrong. And again, like some of that is whether it's like a parenting instinct. Like someone said to me when I became a parent, becoming a parent is signing up to be worried for the rest of your life. And it only gets worse. At least when they're 6 months old, you have some control. But, it gets harder and harder. So I do think there is like multiple ways that we experience anxiety regularly.
So, and this fight or flight response, there's like, your body's designed to have that. You talked about that, but there's all these studies that talk about the damaging effects of an overly active fight or flight response. Like maybe if you find yourself in a relationship that you fight a lot, or you're angry with someone a lot and there's just sort of a hostility around this, and you sort of live in this space of fight or flight, it literally, it affects your brain is not designed by God to live in a space like that. There's actually there's some counselors in our community who their job is to work with kids who basically live in fight or flight their whole life. And it's damaging to their brains. It's damaging to their relationships. It's damaging to their ability to absorb information and learn and grow and all of these sorts of things. It's not a space that we're designed to live in.
And even like just to give more information on that, I've talked about this before. I didn't really talk about it this week as much, but the opposite of fight and flight is rest and digest. So when you go into fight and flight, as I understand it, and there's probably people out there that understand it better, but your whole body, it essentially shuts down systems that aren't helpful to running away from stuff. So you can't digest food well when you're in fight or flight response. Like there's multiple systems that you need that are really important.
Yes.
And you can't do those things.
So shout out to your wife. Allison and I are going. So well, tell us about what your wife does.
So my wife teaches birthing classes. And so again, this is like a classic husband-wife thing, right? When I was doing a sermon, probably 2-3 years ago, incorporating some stuff on fight and flight and some of these systems, I was like, let me tell you about these body systems. And she looks at me with this look that only, like, why is reserved specifically for husbands? And she's like, you realize, like, this is what I do for a living. Like, as a job, I teach people this stuff. And you're telling me, like, it's new information to me. I'm like, no, I'm very aware. So she teaches birthing classes that really, like, land on the idea that birth happens best when we're relaxed. Not when I'm relaxed, because I don't give birth, but for women, birth lands. It happens best when there's relaxation involved, and allowing your body to do what it's made to do, and the tension that you're almost taught to live into today, like the fear that is built up around it, actually makes it harder and harder,
and more painful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the whole thing, like we were learning last night, and I was just thinking about your sermon, and then your wife, then a couple days later, we're in this class and she's reiterating, like,
she stole my sermon.
That's right. It was good, man. It was good. Yeah. She did a good job. So, anyway, so she was just talking about a lot of this pain that women experience in childbirth just has to do with the fact that they're in fight or flight because they're in all of culture, most of history, what you see in Hollywood has trained you to be petrified of this moment.
Yeah.
And then so you come in and you're just like, you're in fight or flight, your body's shutting down, you're ready to fight an animal, and then you're supposed to also like drop a baby right
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, like, there's all these different things, like, without getting too much into it, in different parts of the world that we would say were less developed, they actually do things better. So there's plenty of stories about women working in fields, going into a dark corner of a room, giving birth to a baby, strapping it to them, and then carrying on working. And we do the whole thing, or we used to at least, with like, you're in an operating theater, essentially. Like, when does anything good happen there?
You're hooked up to all the stuff.
Hooked up to all the stuff.
You're
You've got these bright lights,
beeping stuff. Be relaxed. Totally chill out in this environment where people like come when they're super, super sick. And,
exactly. It's a bit of a nonsense. Let me just say this: my wife would be so proud of the fact that we're sitting here talking about birthing on this podcast.
I was just wondering, how long can you and I talk about birthing before it's just totally inappropriate for two guys to be sitting here talking about?
We just got at some point opt out and say I don't know.
But it's the same stuff.
It is the same stuff. It's fight and it's flight and it's learning to manage that response and realize that, like, just because it's there. And it is important, and it's a life-preserving thing, doesn't mean you just get to let it control everything. And that goes back to that overall thing. I think we started off with the question around emotions, with the idea, like, emotions are great at some things, but they don't belong in the driver's seat. They don't. You can't put them in the trunk of the car. You can't put them in the driver's seat. You have to learn to deal with them. But we tend to do one or the other. Like, a lot of us, especially guys, tend to relegate them to, like, the back. I'm never afraid. I don't do fear. I'm not scared of anything. Or we let them drive. No, I'm scared of everything. And there's always something around the corner to be terrified of.
I'm never afraid. I just get angry. Well, what's underneath that anger? Well, I just don't want people to think I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
So you're scared of people thinking you're an idiot.
Yes.
Oh, so you do get afraid. And I know for me, I kind of joke about this. Like, I was like emotionally flatlined until I turned 18. And then I woke up and was like, oh, there's other human beings here. Yeah. And they care about things and they want. So there was a little bit of maturity that took place somehow at that age. And then when I was around 25, I started to realize that I didn't have only two emotions: angry and happy.
Yeah.
And then I started to be able to subdivide that. And I think that being able to subdivide and pinpoint the underlying emotions is a significant, if not the definition of maturity as a human being. And so if you just think, oh yeah, I'm either happy or angry, then maybe you have some journeys to take in maturing as a human being.
And there's that whole part of your brain that is designed to look at that question and say, is this a good emotion, a reasonable emotion? Especially with fear, that prefrontal cortex's job of saying, is there anything to be afraid of? To go back to the ocean, I was never scared of sharks growing up. And the reason I was never scared of sharks is I just knew that in actual fact, like, when you're swimming in the ocean, especially in a place like England, sharks are the last thing you need to be scared of. There's so many other things to be scared of, mainly the fact that you're in this huge body of water that is way stronger than you, that is uncontrollable. And that in itself is far
and you went
more
looking for waves in the process. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Like that in itself is far more of a reason to be afraid. Like, being able to look at our fear and say, is this a reasonable thing to be afraid of, is actually a good process to learn. And we all have to do that. How you do that with anxiety, when you're constantly expecting something to come up, that's, I think, a bigger challenge for us. Like, how we learn to deal with that constant feeling that something could go wrong. I don't know I don't know that that's as easy for most of us. That suspicion that there's something lurking around the next corner or the next corner.
Yeah, and I think this is where, reaching out to a professional who can help teach you some practices to do that is super, super helpful. And like you've said all throughout the series, and I'll admit, like, I'm not trained in that. But there is a hope, because just like anxiety is almost like a well-worn path of fear.
Yeah.
And you just sort of, like, if you think about,
I love that picture.
Yeah, a path that, like, is just dirt because it's been walked on so many times. That's actually how neural pathways work in our brains, is we respond in a similar way over and over and over again, and it's almost easier for your brain to then continue to respond to that, which then starts to eventually manifest into anxiety. If I'm saying that wrong or explaining it incorrectly,
Someone will
feel
correct
free to
you.
reach out and explain.
Well, just let me tell you
much
this.
better. But so part of the process of finding healing over anxiety or constant propensity towards fear is learning how to practice certain things so that you create new well-worn paths. This well-worn path like that may sound like discouraging because you're like, yeah, it's just deeply wired into my brain. Well, that can work in your favor.
Absolutely,
also.
yeah.
You can create a new well-worn path, which is the way of Jesus. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those could be well-worn paths. And then your body, your very physiology is actually assisting you in living in the way of Jesus because it's a well-worn path. You actually like start to do the right thing or feel the right emotions by habit, not just by calculation.
So we talked a little bit on Sunday about the idea that in some ways, the fact that the Bible says "do not be anxious about anything" for the right person is like, no, like I'm now going to be more anxious.
Everyone chuckled at that.
Theoretically, the Bible says, like it says, like 365 times, I believe one person counted, "do not fear," and people are always like, it says it once for every day, so go out and do not be afraid. And then we look at it and we're like, okay, this feels a little bit more complex than that. So what is a healthy reading of "do not be anxious about anything"? Because that seems to me like, again, this is something that Paul he speaks to this church who have a load of societal issues they're dealing with. It's not like they're living easy. They've got political pressures like we have. They've got poverty. They've got all of these different things they're struggling with. And still Paul says to them, not only be joyful, now don't be anxious. Like what do we take away from that if it's not just go and work harder to not be anxious?
Gosh, that's a great question. I think that there's a lot of things like that in Scripture. We talked about that in the Lord's in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
There's all these like seemingly impossible commands or invitations. I love to think about the commands of Scripture as invitations to fullness and life. Yeah, and I think that it's supposed to mess with you. Like, seriously, how am I supposed to do that? And then it's an invitation to a journey. It's not like you just flip a switch, but it's an invitation to a lifelong journey of figuring out how to live a life.
Yeah.
What elements do I need to include in my life where I eventually become the kind of person that is just less anxious all the time?
So I think, like, to me, the intriguing thing with that specific passage is I think I completely agree. And you're... Like, I would almost rewrite it as choose to move away from anxiety. Choose to make good decisions that move you away from anxiety. And then when you look around that, well, what are some of those things? Like, for at first, the line before is the Lord is near. Jesus is present is maybe a way we would say that. When Elena was struggling to sleep, I lay on the floor for a while and she said, "Daddy, I still can't sleep." And I said, "What is there to be afraid of? I'm here with you." And she said, actually, to give her, she said, "Oh, I'm not afraid. I know that you're here, but I just can't stop thinking about this thing. I just can't stop treading the pathway that I've trod for the last however long. What do I do about that?" And it seems like the next part of that passage is, in everything by prayer and supplication, make your requests be known to God. Like, it seems that Paul's answer to anxiety is a conversation with God, as simplistic as that might seem.
Yeah.
But it is an important part of that process.
And this is actually, if you've ever, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but one of the values that we've had here at South for the last however many years is practice.
Yeah.
And the reason we value that and the reason we talk about spiritual practice is because spiritual practices aren't magical.
Yeah.
They're mechanisms for rewiring our bodies, our minds, and our souls into the way of Jesus.
Yeah, whenever you say practice, I always think of Alan Iverson's like famous, like he does this interview where he gets asked about something about practice and he's just like, practice? We're talking about practice? But actually the weird thing about that whole interview is Alan Iverson absolutely knows how important practice is. Like there is no game without that constant practice. So in every field, we see that with like sports people. We watch people play and we're like, I wish I could do that. And we miss or skip over, especially I notice teenagers that have these dreams do this. They skip over the years and years of practice that enable that kind of performance.
Yeah.
And it's just as true in spiritual disciplines. It's not that God loves us more when we do them. We are learning behaviors that help us to follow Jesus better.
Yeah, I mean, the way of Jesus is just really, really good brain science.
Yeah.
It is. It just is. Like, and it's kind of been awesome. Like, I remember there was this one year, for some reason, I was like reading all these discipleship books and just eating them up. But I also was reading all these neuroscience books, and it was awesome because I was like, Jesus has been teaching good brain science for like ages and ages, and now all the
good brain science.
Exactly, and now there's all these like neuroscientists who are saying, oh, like it's really good to do this and really good to do this. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, this is it. But that's what spiritual practices are. And so going back to the question or the conversation you had with your daughter and all those sorts of things, like this question of like, how do I stop feeling anxiety? Or well, the answer is it's going to take some practice.
Yeah.
And a counselor might be a great guide because what they've been trained in doing is what kind of practices. They become a coach on how to implement certain practices in your life so that eventually, with enough practice, you start to rewire your system and your body and your mind to then live a less anxious life.
And that's what makes the way of Jesus so compelling. And I can't remember if we talked about this last week. Like, I was reading on Elon Musk's Twitter feed the other day. He said about like that the amygdala response, the fight and flight response, is so powerful. That's what makes turning the other cheek such a compelling possibility. The fact that should be physiologically impossible to do. Someone strikes you, you should hit them back, or you should run away. To be able to not do either of those things, which is the way of Jesus, is almost impossible. And yet, like the practice of following Jesus, the empowering of his spirit incredibly enables us to do that very thing. Incredibly, the same thing can empower us to leave behind anxiety.
And I would argue that is what it means to be human. Because the fight or flight response, it's more of that animalistic side of who we are as creatures. And then there's something beyond that. And that's a unique thing to being human. There is this prefrontal cortex, which allows us to actually engage in a question beyond the physical reactions of our bodies and say, wait, what's the right thing to do?
And Jesus, C.S. Lewis, who to some people that's the same thing.
Ooh, I hope
some
not.
Evangelicals.
I mean, I like me some C.S. Lewis, but
there are some people that I'm like, wow, I'm not sure who you're following. But he said years ago, like that's a distinctly human trait as well. That the image of God allows us, like an animal looks at another animal in danger and it fights between herd instinct and self-preservation. And whichever one wins. It either runs away or it helps its friend. Human beings uniquely are able to look at that situation and say, I want to run away. My herd instinct isn't strong enough, but I know that the right thing to do is to help that person. And they're able to make that moral choice, which no other species is able to make. We're unable to say almost like the classic, what would Jesus do in this situation?
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
I'm like hesitant to even show this because I'm probably going to use it in my sermon. So, spoiler alert. But I think that in light of the subject matter, we'll just show this a little bit. And then there's, but there's something beyond that. This is some of what's going on
to being human.
with your, so there's this bottom section here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Yeah, you can. This survival state, it's the brain stem, it's that more animalistic side. Some psychologists call this the lizard brain. You know, it's like anyway, it's that survival state. I need food. I need to get away from dangerous things. I need to so on and so forth. And then there's this state. And I love the way that this is worded. This emotional state, the limbic system is, am I loved?
Am I loved? Yeah, wow.
And then the executive state is the prefrontal lobes. What can I learn from this?
So wait, are they saying that stuff at the back, that white stuff, just does nothing?
I don't know. That's
they not figured that part out yet? They're just like, wait. I'm like, huh.
All right, you
just
looking at a diagram is about as far as I've gone into brain science here. So don't start asking me like, what's all this stuff back here?
Those prefrontal lobes that they, as I understand it, they develop late. And so that that's why teenagers do stupid things.
Yeah.
Because they're still, those prefrontal lobes are still developing. And they used to say that happened when you went through adolescence at maybe 16, something like that. And then later they came to say, no, it's more like 25 that you finally have that.
When it's fully solidified.
Again, I stupidly, again, wasn't good at marriage at this point. When we were getting into arguments when Laura and I were first married, she was still under that age and be like, well, your frontal lobes still aren't developed, are they? Like, they're just, you can't possibly understand.
I've never done something like that in my marriage. Said anything.
But you guys are the same age, whereas we have this age gap that enables me to live into that. But I think the counter argument would be a 19-year-old female has about the same development in prefrontal lobes as a 25-year-old male. Like,
or maybe a 45-year-old male.
So I think... But there is that development of that piece, which really has this potential to govern some of those other things that are more like base animalistic stuff, which is fascinating.
Totally. I actually had a counselor once tell me, a Christian counselor once tell me, he said, I believe that part of the image of God, the imago Dei, is the prefrontal cortex.
Wow.
He says the way of Jesus, all of the invitations of Jesus seem to be governed by that system in the brain. I was like, okay, like I'm not the psychologist. He just said, he's like, I'm not going to burn any bridges or like,
die on a hill over
die on a hill on it or write a book about it or something like that. He said, but I've just noticed that a lot of the commands of Jesus, a lot of the invitations of the way of Jesus are all governed by that space. And so he says, part of my job is to train people how to move further and further into living more of their life from the prefrontal cortex in this and the limbic system, where it's about the engaging healthily between the emotional state and the prefrontal cortex. It's fascinating. I was like, again, I'm not going to write a book either, but
that's why so much of like the work great counselors do with us, like, is around like conversation. Are you communicating? Are you developing these emotions into thoughts and all those different things and sharing them with others? I gave people 3 sort of takeaways that just I think it would be helpful to reiterate.
Totally.
Like, again, anxiety, it's not just don't try and do it, but there is this connection to that with a good conversation with God specifically. It is make your prayers and requests. Like, that's the spiritual aspect that we are actually qualified to talk about more than some of the psychological.
Yeah, this whole show, we've talked about childbearing and psychology,
and as pastors, we're now going to land back in our sweet spot. It is that thing that Jesus does in the garden of a conversation around what he is feeling, what he is concerned about, fearful of, which is incredible to watch Jesus in that place of fear and anxiety. And to be able to have him say, no, this is what I'm experiencing in conversation with his father. And then that incredible step, like he does these things, he acknowledges the fear, he expresses the hope of could there be a different way? But then beautifully, he does have this moment where he abandons the sense of what the outcome should be. He gives it over to God, which is a surrender piece, which we rarely do. And a lady that comes to South came up to me after the service, and she talked about going through a time of sickness and stuff. And she said, like, she showed me the sort of the mantra that she'd had, which was really like absolute surrender. It was giving it over. And I, in prayer, always want to like advocate for the outcome I want. I'm always like, God, this is my hope.
I surrender, but let me give you a list of ideas.
I don't even know if I get as far as surrender. I'm like, here's the hope. the good outcome of prayer is that you do the things on this list. And that isn't Jesus' way, at least around the cross. It is, Father, is this your will? And then it's, okay, I'm going to step into that. And interestingly, when we believe that we're in God's will, somewhere the anxiety starts to disappear. That's at least the spiritual theory. Like that's the map. That's the roadway. There's this moment where we say, okay, God, you know, the things that I think are the worst things are not always the worst things. Death is not the last thing. It's just the thing before the last thing, which is eternity in your presence. There's that moment of starting to surrender some of those things and saying, God, like, okay, you're going to lead me where I need to get to. I'm going to, again, like that's the moment where hopefully Elena turns around to me and says, I can sleep because I know that you're present and I know that I'm going to be okay. Now, she didn't do that, but, you know.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Room to grow.
Yeah,
Turns out
exactly.
a 10-year-old has
it's still
room to grow.
But that is the Jesus way, it seems.
Totally.
To keep bringing those senses of fear, keep bringing the hopes, but also to abandon the sense of, no, I know what this should look like.
That's good. It's good. Any other final words?
I
Before I
think so.
try and broach another, we could talk about underwater basket weaving. I'm not an expert in that, but I could talk about it. You are. All right, perfect. We could talk about what are some other fields of study
just
that
some
we've
things that we just not qualified in. Yeah,
we've ventured, we've
podcasting.
hovered, we've hovered around all these subjects that we don't really. Yeah, awesome. Well, if you are out there, this has been helpful to you, please share, like, comment, that sort of thing. It really helps algorithms and all that stuff. This is just stuff I'm supposed to say.
Yeah, good for you, man.
And we would love to hear from you. So the best way to do that is to put comments in below this video. If you found a practice that's been really, really helpful for you to deal with anxiety, or you want to tell a story about that, whatever, we'd love to read those
and ideas of like what we could do, which might be different. Like, because we're about to move into this new series of Eastertide. After Easter, we'll follow like step by step with some of Jesus' post-resurrection encounters, how he moves some of the early followers' stories onward, because we tend to think about resurrection as this moment where everything's fixed, and what we see is a bunch of people that after resurrection still seem stuck. Like they're not quite getting it still. And Jesus comes along in this journey through to Pentecost where he's like, okay, gonna unpick some of this. We're gonna work on this. We're gonna figure out this. We get to follow along with that. But there's also probably some space in that for us to deal with just maybe some other questions, some other things, topics that we might want to talk about that we're not qualified to talk about.
Awesome.
See you guys.
All right. Catch y'all later. Let's see if I can figure out how to shut this off with
Siri. Shut it all off.
Shut it all off. Nope. I logged out of the tool that I need to be in order to shut this off. So we'll see. Current view broadcast and bye.